Science attempts to answer fundamental questions such as why objects fall, why the climate changes, or why people get sick. Essentially, it investigates why things happen, often starting with shallow answers that evolve into deeper, more substantial explanations. As the saying goes, philosophy begins in wonder, and so does science. While some social scientists are embarrassed by the idea of truth, and some philosophers view explanation as a mere sideshow, Thagard argues that explanation is central to science. Absolute truth is not the primary goal. Instead, we look for the plausibility of hypotheses. If we choose theories based on the best explanation, then explanation is directly relevant to what we accept as true. Cognitive science integrates philosophy, psychology, neuroscience, and computer modeling to understand how students learn to develop their own scientific explanations. Philosophy has the oldest interest in this, dating back to Aristotle. Modern psychologists argues that concepts are for more than just classifying objects. They are tools to explain why things happen.
According to Paul Thagard and Abdinner Lit, explaining why things happen is one of our most important cognitive operations. This involves three major processes. First is providing an example from available information. Second is generating new hypotheses. Third is evaluating complex explanation. We model this using four theoretical approaches: deductive, schematic, probabilistic, and neural.
Consider a doctor's visit. If you have a fever, headache, and cough, your doctor explains this as the influenza virus. This is because people with the flu often describe those exact symptoms. However, if you also have a stiff neck and confusion, the doctor must make a larger inferential leap to diagnose a more serious condition like meningitis. In a deductive model, an explanatory target follows logically from explaining propositions. For example, if anyone with influenza has a fever and you have influenza, then it follows deductively that you have a fever. Hempel's formal argument states that particular facts plus general laws equal a logical consequence.
Often, the relationship is looser than logic and is characterized as a causal schema. In cognitive science, we use explanatory patterns like the idea that people have a mental representations to explain intelligent behavior. Examples of computational models using this approach include Doswall, Leake's pattern, and Phineas. These are not competing with logic. They simply apply different areas of science.
To establish a quantitative but loose relation, we use probability theory. The main method here is Bayesian networks, which provide a convenient way to represent causal relationships and model explanation through statistical relevance. We can also model how we evaluate competing explanations using artificial neurons. In these models, neurons represent propositions, and the links between them are either excitatory or inhibitory. Key examples include the neural engineering framework, holographic reduced representations, and the ECHO program.
Our understanding of causality may be a pre-verbal concept rooted in perception and motor control. For instance, an infant swiping at a mobile develops an image schema. Motor behavior equals a perception of a new situation. This may be innate or learned through early experiences, like seeing that a hand hitting a stationary object makes it move. As shown in Table 3.1, these four approaches differ in how they define targets and explainers, yet they are complementary rather than competitive. Because of our understanding of causality is partly visual and kinesthetic, future models must incorporate non-verbal representations. By taking a neural network approach, we can model how generating hypotheses involves not just words, but visual and emotional inputs that drive our reasoning.
The problem of the relation between coherence and truth is vital for the philosophy of science. Many epistemologists maintain that claims are justified not by empirical foundations, but by whether they are part of the most coherent account available. In this part, we will explore how cognitive coherence bridges the gap to objective truth. However, the history of science is replete with highly coherent theories that have turned out to be false. For example, the phlogiston theory. This theory was a 17th to 18th century scientific concept stating that all combustible materials contain a fire-like element called phlogiston, which is released into the air during burning. It was later disproved by Antoine Lavoisier's discovery of oxygen, which showed combustion is the addition of oxygen rather than the loss of a substance. This suggests that coherence with evidence might be a poor guide to truth. This is known as the pessimistic induction. The skeptical view that because past theorists were wrong, our current ones likely are too. Before finding a solution, we must reject several accounts. The first one is coherence theory of truth. It plausibly gives mind too large a place in constituting reality. It is rejected for overemphasizing the mind's role. And the second one is foundationalism. It fails because sense experiences are non-certain. The last one is probability theory. It suffers from problems of interpretation, realization, and implementation in complex scientific networks. We pursue a non-probabilistic approach called explanatory coherence. In this model, the echo program spreads activation among units in a network to maximize the coherence of all propositions. But how do we ensure this internal mental symmetry actually reflects external reality? Answer lies in how theories develop over time. Broadening is the explanation of new and diverse kinds of facts. It represents the horizontal expansion of a theory's power as it successfully accounts for more empirical data, proving its versatility across different domains of evidence. Deepening, on the other hand, is the explanation of why. The theory works by being explained by another hypothesis that provides a deeper level of understanding. This vertical growth anchors a theory in reality by identifying the causal mechanisms that drive the observed phenomena. While the pessimistic induction shows theories can fail, Thagard argues for a more optimistic conclusion. He proposes the cautiously optimistic induction. That coherence of the right kind, explanatory coherence that progressively broadens and deepens, is a reliable indicator of approximate truth. For example, consider the germ theory of diseases, which says that contagious diseases are caused by microorganisms such as bacteria, viruses, and fungi. A particular instantiation of the germ theory identifies a specific disease that is caused by a specific microbe. For example, influenza is caused by viruses of the family Orthomyxoviridae. This theory has been deepened over the years by microbiological accounts that explain how viruses infect cells, replicate themselves, and disrupt the functions of cells and organs. For many viruses, biologists have identified all of their genes and functions they perform. Thus, we now know not only that myxoviruses cause different types of influenza, but how they do so by their mechanisms of attachment, infection, and reproduction. Normally, a deeper hypothesis is not just added to explain a basic one, it has independent evidence supporting it. Deepening often involves reductionism, where theories at one level are explained by theories at a more fundamental level, providing a sturdy ladder of causal mechanisms. So how do we distinguish genuine scientific progress from mere mental consistency? Thagard introduces the litmus test of progressiveness. We cannot look at a theory in a single moment. We must look at its trajectory through history. A progressive theory such as evolution or general relativity is characterized by its constant movement. It is always broadening, reaching out to explain new and diverse facts, and deepening by uncovering the underlying causal mechanisms that make those facts possible. In contrast, non-progressive theories eventually hit a wall. Theories like phlogiston and the ether, where rejected not just because they were wrong, but because they stopped growing. And they failed to explain new anomalies and could not provide deeper causal foundations. For Thagard, this historical movement is continuous broadening and deepening is our strongest evidence that a theory is successfully mapping the structures of independent world and moving toward approximate truth. We must ask, is science just a mental game of coherence? No. Thagard argues for scientific realism, the view that science aims at and succeeds in, achieving true theories about a world that exists independent of our representations and mental states. This theoretical framework leads us to one of the most persistent challenges in philosophy, the demarcation problem. How do we objectively distinguish genuine science from pseudoscience? Thagard argues that we must look beyond Karl Popper's famous falsifiability. Instead, we should examine the history and develop of a field. Is it progressive? Does it show a consistent pattern of broadening its explanatory scope and deepening its causal foundations? Pseudosciences such as astrology are identified by their stagnation. They fail to adapt to new discoveries, and most importantly, they tend to ignore anomalies that contradict their core beliefs. While science is defined by its constant, coherent evolution in the face of new evidence, pseudoscience is defined by its refusal to change, effectively cutting itself off from the path to approximate truth. Science isn't just about testing, it is about discovery. This happens through abduction, or inference to the best explanation. When a scientist encounters a surprising fact, they generate a hypothesis that, if true, would provide a highly coherent explanation. Scientific knowledge is not merely an individual achievement. It is socially mediated. Coherence arises within a community of researchers who engages in communicative interaction. As scientists share evidence and subject theories to peer critic, their individual coherent judgments begin to converge. This convergence creates a social consensus, where the most explanatory theory becomes the accepted standard for the entire field. In conclusion, Paul Thagard demonstrates that while absolute certainty remains elusive, we have a clear path forward. Through the integration of abduction, explanatory coherence, and social consensus, science continuously moves towards the truth. By focusing on coherence of the right kind, that which is progressive and causal, we achieve an increasingly accurate, approximate picture of our world.
So for this part, we will talk about creativity in science, technology, computer science, and medicine, based on the work of Paul Thagard and Daniel Saunders. Specifically, we will focus on the chapters 9, 10, and 11. According to Thagard in the introduction of chapter 9, creativity operates across many domains, but mayroong common mechanisms behind them, and that central idea is what he calls the combinatorial conjecture. The idea that creativity results from combining mental representations. So, ibig sabihin, from the very beginning, pinapakita niya na creativity is not something that appears out of nowhere. Instead, it is something grounded in how the mind processes existing knowledge. Now, building onto that, according to Thagard's combinatorial theory, creativity happens when the brain recombines existing representations such as concepts, images, and prior knowledge. Based on chapter 9, he explains that these representations are actual neural processes, meaning patterns of brain activity that can be recombined to produce new ideas. So, instead of thinking na creativity is pure inspirations, hindi. Mas accurate sabihin na it is a neurocomputational process where the brain connects and reorganizes information. That is why Thagard argues that creativity is both cognitive and computational. Hindi siya random concepts or ideas lang because it follows a structure. Another important mechanism discussed in chapter 9 is analogy. According to Thagard, analogy plays a significant role in many discoveries because it allows scientists to transfer knowledge from one domain to another. For instance, Newton connected projectile motion to planetary motion, while Franklin connected sparks to lightning. Based on Table 9.1, many of these analogies are what we call long-distance analogies. meaning they connect completely different domains. So here, creativity happens through conceptual transfer, where existing structures are applied to new situations instead of inventing ideas from the scratch. Now, aside from analogy, Thagard also discusses the role of serendipity in Chapter 9. According to his analysis, around a quarter of scientific discoveries involve some level of accidents. However, he made it clear that accidents alone are not enough to produce creativity. For example, in the discovery of penicillin, the important part was not just noticing the mold, but recognizing that it kills the bacteria. So, as Thagard explained, what makes a discovery creative is the formation of meaningful propositions, not just the observation itself. This means that even accidental discoveries still depend on the cognitive interpretation and hypothesis formation. Now we're gonna jump onto the technological invention still on Chapter 9. Thagard compares it with the scientific discovery. According to his findings, invention is more focused on solving practical problems rather than explaining a phenomena. Based on his data, around 87 of inventions involve visual representation, and many also involve sensory motor thinking. This shows that invention relies heavily on spatial and physical imagination. So unlike scientific discovery, which is often theoretical, invention is more grounded on embodied condition, where thinking is connected to physical interaction with the world. Now in Chapter 10, Saunders and Thagard extends this idea to computer science. According to them, creativity in this field emerges mainly from problem solving, especially when dealing with the complex systems. They explain that many innovations in computer science come from the frustration with the existing systems, which pushes developers to create better solutions. Additionally, based on the interviews discussed in the chapter, they identified two modes of creativity: the intense mode, which involves focus and deliberate thinking, and the casual mode, where insights occur during rest or relaxation. So here, creativity is not only about effort, but also about incubation and relaxation or reflection. In comparing computer science with natural science, as discussed in Chapter 10, Thagard and Saunders point out that the main difference lies in the type of question being asked. Natural science focuses on why questions, while computer science focuses on the how questions. However, despite this difference, both fields rely on the similar cognitive process such as analogy, pattern recognition, and systematic reasoning. So, overall, creativity across disciplines still operates through the same underlying mental mechanism. Finally, in Chapter 11, medical discovery is explained in terms of pattern recognition and hypothesis formation. According to Thagard, doctors and researchers identify patterns among symptoms, causes, and biological mechanisms to arrive at an explanation. This involves different types of reasoning, including deduction, induction, and especially abduction, which is inference to the best explanation. So in medicine, creativity lies in the ability to connect patterns and generate the most plausible explanation for a condition. Again, this supports the idea that creativity is based on combining representations and recognizing meaningful patterns. So, in conclusion, based on the chapters 9, 10, and 11, Thagard consistently argues that creativity is a structured cognitive process grounded in the combination of mental representations. Whether in science, technology, computer science, or medicine, new knowledge emerges not from nothing but from reorganizing existing informations to new forms. So, ultimately, as emphasized throughout the chapters, creativity is not merely an inspiration or an accident, but a disciplined process of thinking, reasoning, and pattern recognition.
Many researchers have found that there is a significant and contributive effect on tracking relevant works from different fields of discipline in grounding science, psychology, linguistics, philosophy, neuroscience, and computer science. It is therefore, for a long time, scientists and researchers have thought science as a cognitive one, where its method is grounded not only in one discipline. This in return is one of the things that Thagard has also asserted in his 2012 book, The Cognitive Science of Science. Majoring the philosophy of science, he believes that this field is not solely a beneficiary of cognitive science, but is a major contributor to it. In 1962, Thomas Kuhn published The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, from which he asserted that revolutionary science is not a standard paradigm, but a changing one. Though Thagard emphasized Kuhn's paradigm as a term used in various ways, It is undeniably a turn for the scientific world to embrace. Kuhn's conceptual change remained important for three reasons, according to Thagard. First, it displays the structure and growth of scientific knowledge. Second, it shows the occurrences of the history of every child. That is, how a child responds to continuous extending concepts. And lastly, to show the importance of cognitive science in developing science education. And simply because in this particular reason, syempre tayo kasi nagsisimula tayo sa basic concepts of science. Pero as we dive deeper to science along with our age, mas nag-extend din yung concepts na pinag-aaralan natin, which are necessary for theorizing. So, Thagard explained this particular reason in relation to devising educational techniques appropriately for effective acquisition of scientific knowledge. So, due to a rapid change in scientific ideas today, scientific education should be able to contribute to a lifetime change in one's life. So, ibig sabihin, hindi siya constant or stagnant. So, it's the continuous pressing of social issues such as the increasing dangers of climate change, extending needs for healthcare, and the rampant spreading of poverty. Thagard's stages of change is inspired by a French philosopher named Auguste Comte, who claimed that human intellect started from a theological to metaphysical to positive change. Within the commonalities of life, mind, and disease, so ito yung main three na ipapakita mamaya when it regarding dito sa changes na to or stages ng change. Thagard in return discussed conceptual change in three stages: theological stage, qualitative stage, and mechanistic stage. First, for life. In theology, Christian knowledge of life begins as a creation of God, as per the book of Genesis. For life, we mean lahat ng biotic elements like plants, animals, and humans. In other culture and religion, there are different accounts on how one or more supernatural beings brought life into existence. Just like, for example, in Roman mythology, a god brought order to chaos and divided the seas and the four winds. So in this way, we can understand na life in this stage is from a matter of myth rather than a detailed exposition of the origins of life. For the qualitative naman, first example it is si Aristotle. He asserted that animals and plants have a principle of life called psyche that initiates and guides reproductive, metabolic, and growth processes. So this stage, pwede rin natin siyang tawaging vitalist stage since it refers to the belief na ang mga bagay na may buhay ay may distinctive force in them that makes up their whole existence and function. In the mechanistic stage, however, example dito si Epicurus, he asserted that the things are composed of the interaction of atoms. Though in this time, syempre, restricted siya when it comes to machinery. Secondly is si Descartes. He noted that the bodies can be understood through its parts and operations, katulad ng pipes and clocks. And by the 19th century, however, the mechanistic view of life became more agreeable due to cell doctrine. Dumagdag pa dito yung work ni Charles Darwin na On the Origin of Species and Natural Selection, where he draws an evolution where living things learn to adapt to their environment for survival. This, unfortunately, showed inadequate accounts on how evolution occurred succeedingly to offsprings. Or in simpler terms, kung paano tayo nagmula sa unggoy, tapos manganganak ka ng mas less unggoy, tapos manganganak ulit ng mas mukha ng tao. He was, unfortunately, he was unable to prove that in advocacy. So today, we can view biology as thoroughly mechanistic with biochemistry, molecules, and an extended knowledge of cells. Since we know that cells are alive, and their proteins enable them to perform division, motion, adhesion, signaling, energy synthesizing, and many more. So for now, we can see the progression, right? For the disease in theology, specifically from the book of Exodus, God delivers diseases as punishments, just like how medieval Christians believed that the Black Plague was a punishment from God. And in an early period, Hippocrates, he wrote about epilepsy and calling it sacred disease. Add to that in the modern theology world, there are still people who believe that STDs are God's punishment for homosexuality. For the qualitative explanation naman, Hippocrates, again, believed that diseases can be treated by changing the balance of humors. So itong humors na to, there are four: the blood, phlegm, bile, and black bile. In Chinese medicine, gumagamit naman sila ng herbs in restoring the balance of yin and yang. And in India, Deepak Chopra views that bodily processes are governed by doshas: Vata, as air and space; Pitta, fire and water; and Kapha, the earth and water. Too much or too little of these elements can cause diseases. So obviously, yung notion within qualitative explanation of diseases is umiikot sa idea ng balance and elements na kind of metaphysical, since hindi mo naman talaga naiintindihan kung ano yung pinaka-nature ng yin and yang or ng doshas or whatever. But ayun, all these are opposed rather to that of Western medicine, which is in mechanistic stage. In the 1860s, na-discover ni Pasteur ang germs. So they developed the germ theory disease, Pasteur and his acquaintances. And then they found out that bacteria are responsible for silkworm diseases. Shortly was found to be the cause of cholera, tuberculosis, and gonorrhea. Viruses, on the other hand, were not observed until 1939 and found to be causing influenza and measles. In later years, other diseases such as scurvy, nalaman natin na cause siya ng lack of vitamin C. Sclerosis is caused by abnormal practice of white blood cells removing axons from neurons. Cystic fibrosis, and many more such as mutated genes, defective metabolism, and abnormal cell mutation or cancer are now studied. The last example would be the mind. In theology, God formed a man from dust and breathed life into it, and then it has a soul. This made the understanding towards indestructibility or immortality. If aware kayo or if nanonood kayo ng mga K-drama, sobrang napoportray yung notion of soul doon kasi naniniwala sila na kailangan mong mag-move on sa buhay na to just so you can be reincarnated. Kasi hindi nila alam kung tao ba ulit o hayop or flower, plants, but that's their notion of reincarnation or soul, the notion of soul. Additionally, we can say that Descartes lived up to this commitment with his mind-body dualism. Kasi diba, nagkaroon siya ng questioning, then he found out na kaya naman palang mag-exist ng mind ko without my body. So maybe my mind is a distinct substance apart from the body. Pero yung notion niya ng pituitary gland, we can consider that as qualitative explanation. Since para na siyang vitalistic kung papakinggan natin. And more to this qualitative explanation, we have Locke and Hume asserted that minds are functioned by ideas derived from sense experience. Then later on sa phenomenology, andito si Husserl appeared, diba? And attempted to study the features of human consciousness. Ito na yung I forgot the term, but it has transcendentalism sa term, but that's it. Yun yung kay Husserl. Then sa linguistics naman, we have J.L. Austin, who points out ordinary use of words could tell us something about the nature of the mind. So ang dami, diba? But in mechanism, in 1958, The first computational model of human problem solving was developed by Newell, Shaw, and Simon. So note lang na itong model na to, it is only a mimic, no? This model mimics the thinking that occurs when algorithmic processes are applied to mental representations akin to data structures found in software. So, hindi talaga ito yung concluded way kung paano tayo talaga nag-isip. So, this continues with von Neumann saying na no, digital computers are different from human brains. But in 1992, Churchland and Sejnowski argued that neural mechanisms are computational, pero in a different way than computer programs. So today, neuroscience adheres to computational ideas and processes of human thinking, such as AI, artificial intelligence, diba? It loosely performs biological neuron mechanism. Plus, modern psychology as well reclassifies representations as material things akin to data structures found in computer programs. Note na mimic pa lang ito. Hindi pa ito yung concluded na study na ganun talaga nag-work yung utak natin. So with these three, thankful for Thagard or maybe not, kasi ang dami talaga nito. Halos buong libro is nakadisperse yung features of science. But in this factor, conceptual change, we can clearly understand na meron talagang progression within the development of cognitive science historically. The changing world requires not just mere rejection of previous beliefs, but replacement by a scientific and mechanistic view by Paul Thagard. And actually, even though it appears appealing sa atin, there are some mishaps in accepting revolutionary science as changing. And Thagard gave two. First is cognitively, where he explained that most people are not knowledgeable enough about how germs, vitamins, and diseases work, which is given nga, especially sa age, or like, sa age natin ngayon, na sobrang daming theories about health, na you need to do this and that for your health to be this and that. So, ang dami ng studies and sari-sariling lessons or like studies when it comes to this. Secondly naman is emotionally, because despite the rapid advancement of the scientific world, we cannot deny na meron paling mga sakit na hindi pa rin nabibigyan ng lunas. So, people tend to stick to alternative treatments. In other cases, they seek less expensive and painless ones, yung mga non-invasive treatments. Meron pa ngang nagsi-self-diagnose and ayun, part din siya ng emotional factor and why hindi pa totally ma-accept itong changing ng revolutionary science. So, nevertheless, I have high hopes that this feature is of the great deal of your understanding.
Now, if nag-wonder kayo with all the informations and all the yapping sessions given, ano nga ba ang demarcation of science according to Thagard? Sobrang dami niya kasing sinabi sa paper niya. Pero, Thagard says in Why Astrology is a Pseudoscience, a theory is pseudoscientific if it is less progressive and it is futile in utility when it comes to solving problems. That is why for him, it is necessary to look into the progression and development of science historically. And with the detailed exposition of the features, we can say na science must be, first, explanatory, second, empirical, third, evaluative, fourth, a beneficiary of problem solving, and is not ignorant to anomalies, since it must have the ability to make progress over time, and lastly, fifth, as time passes, it must also be conceptually changing. Lahat naman ng ito ay na-indicate, actually, in a very detailed way that though it is dispersed across his works, it is a necessary note for an inconsistent consistency of the scientific world in his view. So, with all that, I hope you learned from this video and thank you all for listening. Bye-bye!